Hey, Michael, you like sailing?
Nope.
Good, then let me tell you about Sperry. Sperry is seafaring clothing, accessories, and shoes that are essential accompaniments for your adventurous lifestyle. Please visit Sperry.com to browse all their merch. And for the adventure of kicking around the office, Michael Blum recommends the authentic original 2-eye boat shoe in light coral nubuck.
Or pink, as it really is.
It's called pink now, yeah.
Yes. Welcome to Splain Yourself, the podcast that gives regular people a chance to explain their action or beliefs. I'm Michael, the muscle hamster.
And I'm Sarah, Diddy Bread Davis. Our guest today is John Cochran, one of our esteemed colleagues who I like to think of as the Gandalf of Next High School because he's wise, he has a great sense of humor, and he pulls off the salt and pepper look with ease. Welcome, John.
You shall not pass.
Yes! That's amazing.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
And today we've asked John here to talk about changing political parties as an adult. And I think this has a lot of components to sort of discuss life in more broad terms. So before we get to John, Sarah, you also went through this process.
I did.
Can you talk about this a little bit? And how this felt?
Yeah, I can. And in fact, I'll mention that I was really excited when John suggested this as a topic because I can identify with that 100%. So growing up in a conservative area of the world, growing up in a conservative family, my faith was really important to me and my family, and it still is. But it started to become pretty clear to me as I grew into adulthood that the ways in which we expressed our faith through politics didn't always make the most sense, you know? So I started to question some of that stuff. And without getting into too much detail, yeah, I would say I'm a little left of center these days, even though there are a few issues here and there that I'm still like, I don't know if I can come all the way across the line on that one. But for the most part, if you asked my voting history, I haven't actually been voting for that long, but it's leaned a little more left. But John, I know you have kind of a similar background, similar history but your story is obviously different from mine. So that's what we're very interested in. Why don't you enlighten us?
And can you talk a little bit about the circumstances in you growing up and how that sort of formed your original ideas about politics?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about things on sort of a trajectory, and it seems best to kind of narrow the boundaries in terms of how we talk about something. And so if I look back on my life, I think, okay, when I was in high school, I was in the Young Republicans Club and wore my little bow tie on the club meeting days and went around and stole the political signs out of the yards that were of the opposing party.
Oh my.
And took them and had a bonfire, which is completely illegal.
That's insane.
And so I started looking around though in my later years and realized, wait a second, everything I've been told up until this point has kind of entwined my religious upbringing and my faith with my political affiliation. And I think in a very short amount of time, in terms of my whole life, that was what I would say bifurcated maybe, or we just torn apart. So the two things separated for me. And then I think now I say they are actually converging again, but in a more authentic and meaningful way.
Wow.
And so I can go into that
a
little bit. So I should start with the change that took place and how quickly it took place.
Sure.
So 2004, George Bush was running against John Kerry, and we were in the middle.
Bush the younger.
Bush 2.
Right. And
I did not vote. I wasn't old enough to vote for his father.
Right.
And so, at any rate, so he's running for re-election. We're enmeshed in the Middle East in war, Afghanistan, Iraq, searching for the weapons of mass destruction.
WMDs, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just a mess all the way around. And 9/11 had happened 3 years prior. And that, I think, fundamentally changed the way Americans kind of assess their own threats.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And so it seemed unwise to switch captains midstream.
Yeah.
And so I was very nervous about a Democrat being elected. But that came with a lot of other things that I was, for better or worse, I wouldn't say I was uninformed, because political science was my minor, and I know there are people who, in their convictions, are very conservative.
Sure.
And hold, a hard line with regard to that. But I do feel like I was kind of sold raw, like, not raw goods.
A bill of goods?
Yeah, like a false bill of goods.
Yeah.
Like we could say that. There was a sense in which I'm looking around and I'm saying, okay, the things which we espouse as virtuous, the things that the party says are the values that we want to preserve in the American culture and want to really promote, didn't match with the things that they were trying to do politically on the political stage, in the political theater.
So can you give us a specific example of something that didn't match up?
Sure. I think the first thing that sort of hit my radar with regard to that was the idea of unrestricted business dealings.
Yeah.
For the sake of capitalism.
Making more money.
And what that was doing to the environment. That's going to play out in the coming years after 2004. So let me get back really quickly. We'll come back around to that because that's a big deal right now, I think.
Deregulation, sure.
Yeah, the deregulation and the environment. So my faith told me I needed to be a good steward of the world.
Yeah.
And that means to take care of the things around me. My faith told me to love my neighbor. My faith said that I should care more about my enemy than really I do my own self.
Right.
To give in addition to my tunic, my coat, if it's asked of me.
Right.
And I didn't see that as the spirit behind the policies that were being enacted. But at the point, I couldn't have articulated any of that. I was just there's something off.
Yeah, you just feel it.
Something's off. I'm going to work through this. I'm going to try and work through it. So, the election, I'm so nervous. I was buying in at the time to this fear-mongering that is still a part of our electoral process.
Very much so.
On both sides.
Very much so.
And so, I was buying into it. I was going to be out of town for Election Day. I knew that. And so I voted early, and I was in New Orleans. I was working, and I knew I finished my work, and I went back to the hotel, and I turned on the news, and I watched the news to see what the results were going to be, and I stayed up late into the night, 3 o'clock, and I had a flight at 6, so I had to leave at 5 to get to the flight. And so I got about 2 hours of sleep, driving across the Pontchartrain Bridge, which is about the longest bridge in the world. And so I'm chilling, going across it, and so energized and pouring down rain. And so that I was super excited. Bush won again, and from there, the world again changed really radically.
Yeah.
Because we aren't finding the things we thought we would in the war. We're not winning the war. We're losing lives. Things like the economy is tanking. All of these things that should not have happened under the watchful eye of a good, solid, grand old party candidate are happening. And 4 years later, from that fear, John Kerry can't win, I'm voting early, to I'm voting for Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And I'm voting for him for a number of reasons. There are, I have some fears. They're still playing in there. The things that I think about when I go into the voting booth, I was trying not to be an issue voter. And so I needed to kind of become a good civil servant or do my civic duty in knowing how the world works, how politics works, how this is all supposed to work, and what kind of effect it's going to have on me, but what kind of effect it's going to have on my neighbor.
Yeah.
And so I go into the booth, and I felt like I was cheating on my...
Wow.
spouse. Like,
Yeah.
it felt, because it was so much a part of who I was.
Yeah.
As it turns out, through experiences and learning and reading, that was all by design.
Huh.
The religious right in the late 70s said, over Roe v. Wade, we got to do these things, and this is how we're going to do it.
Right, they
We're gonna
mobilized.
align-
They made a conscious effort to mobilize.
I mean, they built the architecture out for how they were going to, how Ronald Reagan was going to win. And if you look at the numbers, they did it with Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
Super interesting, though. David Brooks just wrote an article on this opinion piece. Did you read
read
this?
it today.
That's super interesting, right?
Yes.
David Brooks is like, if any of you need to know the history of Roe v. Wade, here it is.
Yeah. He got a lot of flack for that. Like, they're already angry about it.
I thought it was very astute.
I thought so too.
And for those of us who haven't read it, what does Brooks conclude?
So he adopted the attitude of a Democrat, appealing to a Democratic congressman or politician, appealing to his party in order to say, okay, late-term abortions up to the last minute isn't worth fighting for because of what we're losing for. In our efforts to fight for that, we're losing lots of middle ground people that can actually help us win.
Sure. Okay.
But in the article, he included the history behind Roe v. Wade, and he talked about the Republican Party and how.
Well, he talked about the fact that the people who were really pro-life initially considered themselves very liberal.
They were liberal, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was really interesting. They're like, no, we need to fund people who are poor. We need to help pull people out of poverty. The things that are now considered
That's interesting.
like liberal ideologies or in the liberal column.
I wonder if that had anything to do with the fact that, like, the origins of Planned Parenthood were, like, eugenics, you know? I don't know if that's why the liberals would have aligned with being anti-abortion, but that's something I'm willing to research. But anyway, continue.
I totally agree. So all that to say, there was a sense in which the things that we were fed, and honestly, these are not things I heard at home. We didn't really talk about these things so explicitly.
Right.
But there was this undercurrent of us versus them.
Yes. Yes.
My father died 5 years ago. So I had voted for Barack Obama. When he died, I voted for him twice. The first time, I was a cheater, and I felt kind of like, I don't get caught.
Yeah.
I hope nobody sees me leaving with the prostitute out the motel door. This is going to be terrible. Oh man, I hope nobody got my license tag number. 2, the next time being, this is fantastic. This is going to be great. Like, I was really excited. I don't identify as a Democrat. I still don't identify as a Democrat. I'm an independent. But I made the choice later very comfortably saying, these are careful hands into which I am placing this is a thoughtful person who considers things in a thoughtful manner and is not rash and is the opposite of what we have now.
P.S. How many people miss Barack Obama? Raise your hand.
He will go down in history. He will go down in history as one of the greatest presidents. I am convinced of that. I think the Affordable Care Act will become a single-payer system, and I think that was part of the architecture of it. I think first we got to get people sort of understanding what's going to happen, so we're going to do it this way. Yeah. But the long-term goal, the long-term trajectory for that is, single-payer, and I'm fine with that. I'm just saying that he, for many other things, is going to be remembered as one of our greatest presidents.
Can I interject for just a second here?
Absolutely.
Because I'll tell you that everything surrounding Obama's presidency, that was kind of the catalyst for me moving from having my shift. So
let's talk about this for a second.
Yeah.
I was someone who, because I believe that God's image is imprinted on every human being.
Absolutely.
Believes that I'm pro-life, and for that reason.
Yeah.
Now, when I say pro-life, I mean pro-life very broadly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I am not in favor of placing all types of restrictions on every type of abortion because I think if we called it something else, we could call the procedure something else.
Yeah.
And it would be completely acceptable to all people across the spectrum.
You really think so? I don't think so.
I do. So I read a piece that sort of helped me understand more. I read a piece about a woman who said, I was one of the people who had a very late term abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And they called it an abortion, but the child, it was a wanted child initially, wasn't breathing anymore. Wasn't alive anymore.
So in cases like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But depending on how you enact the legislation, it could restrict that and even endanger the life of the mother. So
right.
I'm not,
I think most conservatives are on board with if it's gonna kill the mom.
So that's the problem. It's polar. They're really not. And
are they not? I haven't talked to enough of them. I don't know. I don't know.
So in the way that Democrats are like, we want access to late term. Conservatives are like, absolutely not. And so they really are.
Sure.
And a lot of people who were commenting on Brooks's article were kind of coming to the center and saying, there were Democrats who were saying, there's validity in this, and Republicans who were saying, I get it. There is.
Where were you seeing comments? Because this might be a difference.
There's a little dialogue cloud at the bottom, and it's got this gigantic number in it. If you click that little cloud,
I need to go there. I'm going to tell you what. I read.
And there are plenty of people who want to crucify him.
Right.
There are plenty of people who.
They're all on Twitter.
He's the new Jesus.
Yeah. Well.
And then there's a lot of people that are kind of reasonable in between, going, okay, let's.
I need to probably read that because I was very disheartened when I read he tweeted it, and then I clicked on the article and went from there. But all the comments on the tweet were just super furious.
It's another podcast, but 288 characters isn't enough to really.
Anyway,
and Twitter is the internet's.
I know. I shouldn't have even looked. I don't know why I looked. I clicked on.
I used to get my news from it because it was great. Like you could.
This was even just a few years ago. In fact, people would ask me why are you on Twitter? And I would go, news, duh. No, not anymore. No, I'm with you. But speaking of news, I was talking about my shift earlier. When Obama first got elected, that was 2004, right? 2008 was the first.
9.
Sorry, you're right. 2008, I was commuting to work, so I lived 20, 30 minutes away from work. I started listening to NPR on the way to work, and then this is what. So for 8 years, I was listening to NPR because I didn't want to listen to the stupid, wacky DJs on the way to work.
See, I'm telling you, NPR is going to turn this.
But you know the difference between what you hear, because NPR gets accused of being very biased, which I don't necessarily agree with. But I came at it from a person who had been hearing nothing but conservative parents, preachers, teachers, news sources, Rush Limbaugh, right. Sure. That had been the constant stream in my ears for the first 27 years of my life, right? And all of a sudden, I'm clicking over to this station just because it's something I can kind of tolerate on the way to work. And all of a sudden I realize literally the sound of it is just rational. Do you know what I mean? This sounds like it's coming from a place of neutrality more so than anything I've ever heard in my life. Mm-hmm. And they covered his first election. And they covered his second election. And for 2012, I voted for him. That was the first time I ever voted in my life. In fact, before 2012, if you had asked me about voting, I would have argued tooth and nail that voting didn't matter and it was stupid and it was a waste of time to stand in the line because it didn't matter who president was because it was just going to be the same anyway. And in 2012, I got my ass to the polls and I voted for Barack Obama because the alternative was ridiculous to me at that point,
So this is a great story. My dad was diagnosed with a brain tumor in early October and died on Christmas Eve. Oh, and the election took place right in between that.
Yeah. Oh.
Now, so he went in late September. He was riding his bike around the neighborhood every day. Right after he started becoming symptomatic, he had a brain tumor on his brain stem. He was using a cane to the next week, a walker to the week after that, a wheelchair. His decline was very quick.
Wow.
He couldn't make it into the voting booth, but they took him to the polls so that he could vote with an iPad. They brought it to the car
Wow.
and allowed him to vote with an iPad.
Wow.
Which was really cool. It was
Yes.
and when I asked him, he said, "I got to go vote," and like he could barely talk by that point. And I said, "Well, okay." He's got, "I got to cancel yours out." It's true. He did. We totally did. But I'll tell you,
Was that in a
was
loving
still,
way? when
Yeah,
your dad said that?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
we would have talks about it.
Sure. Yeah.
And I gave him a book called Republicrat, which was written by a conservative theologian, but a social liberal, and a theologian that my dad's, to give you a little bit of history about him, was a Christian and an elder in the church, and was conscientious and made sure that he was doing the things that he needed to do in order to be a good, civil
like
servant,
my
but just a
dad.
servant in general.
Yeah.
And so I didn't begrudge what he was doing, who he was going to vote for. But he did have respect for me. He didn't think what I think I feared the first time when I thought I was cheating.
Right. That your dad would
He was
disown you or something. Yeah.
He knew. So I gave him this book, and he read the book, and he was like, "It was really interesting, and I'm thinking through a lot of things."
Right.
So that was in May, and then he died before he really got to become somebody who's not going to vote for the GOP.
Oh wow.
But I think that was his trajectory.
Was it? You
right?
think that was it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because he was thought. I think there is a sense of, especially at his age. I mean, he was in his early 70s at the time, and so he didn't troll the internet. Like he was, the information that he got from sources that were going to confirm, the bias that was already present.
In the bubble.
It just wasn't part of
that wasn't his routine.
He was really thinking, I really want what's best for everybody, and it was still aligned with. I mean, honestly, his convictions were completely plausible when he voted for Mitt Romney. Yeah. Absolutely, and I don't think Mitt Romney was nearly the threat that we currently have seen.
I probably would have voted.
Well, and I also know that he would not have voted for Donald Trump, and were he alive now, he wouldn't have.
Right.
Because his convictions would have said, "No, I can't do that."
Right.
So, Sarah, how did your father react? We heard a little bit about John's dad, or your family in general.
So, my dad listens to Fox News, although I think he's trailed off of that lately just because Mom has put her foot down.
Same.
Moved to Breitbart.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Oh my
my
God.
mom was like,
I
can't turn it off.
No, and Mom's conservative too. They both vote the same way. But Mom is very much like, let's keep the politics out of out of the house, out of the discussions that we have as a family. In fact, she'll pull me aside at family gatherings and just be like, do not bring up politics with your dad. But Dad and I enjoy these conversations. Like, he and I are now kind of on...
Is he also a ginger?
He's not a ginger, but he has like curly, like blondish hair. So
he's getting there.
We're milkman kids. Nobody has red hair in our family. He's calmed down as far as the stuff he's taking in as far as media, and I still have a great respect for, like, my dad is one of the smartest men I know, and I respect him, and I'll defend him to the death, except for these key political issues. He's definitely a capitalist, and I kind of align with him a little bit on that. But he also bought into the hype and the rhetoric when
around
Obama
justices.
Well, that too. But when Obama was president, I mean, that was 8 years of my dad believing that Obama hated America. I mean, because that's what they were selling.
Muslim. I didn't hear those things. I heard them from other members of my not immediate family.
Yeah.
Who shall remain nameless.
Well, and it wasn't even really the Muslim
who's a
thing.
Muslim?
It wasn't the Muslim thing. Dad didn't
who
care about
swore
that.
his oath on the Quran.
Right, no.
You're listening to something that is just nonsense.
That's not even true. Dad is not an idiot. My dad's not an idiot. So he didn't buy into that stuff. But he really thought because of socialism. Like, he thought Obama was a socialist and that anyone who's a socialist hates America, right? Because he's just got these very deep ingrained political views, and I get that. I respect it. But he knows that I'm a little left of center now, and I'm sure that it's a little bit of a stressor for him, but he also knows that I'm an intelligent human being, and we align theologically 100%. My challenge to him, and I want to challenge him. This is why I tell my mom, like, Mom, let me talk to him, because he's not too old to hear challenges to what he believes. So, like, why is it, like you were saying before, why is it that we say all these things about what we believe the Bible says, and yet in the political arena, those things almost get flipped 180?
I mean, that's a super interesting question.
Yeah.
Because what we really see is what we want in politics is someone who is going to protect our interest, and our interest is almost always centered around power structures.
Yeah.
So what that means is if we aren't heard, we don't have power, and if we don't have power, we are under someone else's power, and they're suppressing us. So we need to maintain power. Now, we can talk about that at the political level. But we can also talk about it like at a base sociological level, right?
Yeah.
So we can bring all types of things into that, and everyone's arguing from this point.
Yeah.
This is not just conservative people or liberal people.
Right.
It is everyone, both, and everyone in between.
Sure.
Which is where you get if we're voting around an issue such as abortion, we really want to protect the power of women to make decisions around their own body,
right.
Which I 100% believe is valid, and I totally get it.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Sure.
In the same way, if we want to talk about power more broadly, we want our party to be in office because they're going to do things that are going to protect the significance of ourselves.
Right.
So we can really bring it down to there's a sense in which politics has become erroneously personal to us.
Yeah.
Where we believe that if our candidate doesn't win, we are personally going to suffer something. It may be the loss of some sort money,
of freedom.
some freedom.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this for a second. This notion of personal freedom. I think it's really important because I think so much of the anti-socialist rhetoric that you get from the really hardline far right Tea Partiers, limited government. This is totally a theory of my own. And I'm just making stuff up, but it's just based on
but you're a smart guy.
what I look at in history.
Yeah.
And I will say that, and I have good ways of illustrating this, and I taught a Gov Econ class one time, economics specifically, and this was the example that I used when we were talking about the deregulation, because that's a huge part of the government's role in the flow of money. And the government's job is to protect the things that are going to make the economy healthy. And so that's one of their duties.
Yes.
And so, anyway, I put the window at post-World War I, pre-civil rights. So mid-40s, early 60s. So basically the 50s, we'll say.
Okay.
This is my theory.
Okay.
Totally shoot from the hip. But I think that the country reached what I would call, and maybe there's a better term for this, critical mass in terms of individual and personal freedoms. Where, and this is how I illustrate it. If Sarah and I and you are the only ones in this room, we feel fairly free. We can just kind of move around.
Right.
I'm very...
I want you to open that door and invite every single person that lives on your street into this space. And suddenly, your freedom has been restricted a lot. You can't move around because when you move, what happens?
I bump into somebody.
You're taking the space that someone else is currently occupying and forcing them to move, which is like there's only so much space before people's freedoms, their freedom to move about in whatever way. I mean, you can stand up and do pirouettes right now. Bring 100 people into this space and you need to...
I can't pirouette no more.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
In a similar way, I think post-World War I, really after the birth of all the babies, the boom, right?
Right, so it's post-World War II.
Suddenly, and this, so I can illustrate it on a larger scale in the sense that where population is great in small areas like New York City and Chicago, there are greater restrictions in terms of their code of law. Like, there are more things you're not allowed to do. Because it's going to eventually, perhaps hurt your neighbor.
pirouetting.
So for you, personal freedom comes from population density?
In terms of laws, the need for more laws to protect people becomes so much greater. It goes back to, I was thinking specifically of the Second Amendment.
Okay.
Which one is that?
That gives you the right to bear arms.
Right to bear arms.
Bear arms. I was really doing that for the benefit of the listeners.
The right to bear arms.
I saw that wink.
Come on, Plum, don't call me out. All right.
So the right to bear arms. So look, 1,000,000 years ago, where you had to ride a horse to see your neighbor.
Yeah.
Who cares if you had a gun?
Nobody. It doesn't matter.
When you are in a 1,000-person tenement in the middle of a city, suddenly that poses a greater threat.
And side note, the news today is of the middle school girl who's now arrested and facing charges for taking a semi-automatic weapon to school just to show, dropped her book bag, I'm not kidding, dropped her book bag, the gun went off, shot 2 kids. That one's in critical condition but stable, the other it was like a shot to his wrist. But I'm just saying I wanted to throw that in there because it is an illustration of your point.
Right, we go from the sublime to the ridiculous, right?
Yes.
So this notion that this is coming back around to how I vote and why I vote the way that I do. When we talk about the threat of socialism for people like Barack Obama, where he wants to restrict our freedoms, when we talk about the loss of freedoms, we're not thinking about it in terms of, is it for the greater good? We're thinking about it in terms of, what do I have to give up for this? Now, this is coming from someone who, I've spent my whole life shooting guns. I inherited a number of them when my father died. He was a lifetime member of the NRA. Roughly 2 or 3 months after he died, my mom was like, get that sticker off of his truck. Not because she's this raging liberal, it's just like,
your mom's like my mom.
We have an association with these crazy people
That's right.
who want to do these things. And
yeah.
those laws are in place because we want to look out for our nation.
Sure.
Not because we're trying to take your freedom away.
That's such a great
point. So that
point.
goes back to my original... So critical mass was reached, and we started to see more and more laws passed that were going to seemingly take freedoms away, but what they were really doing is allowing equal space between you and your neighbor.
And I'll tell you that I had an aha moment when I know that Jerry and I were driving from Columbia to see his family back to Greenville, and it was about one of Obama's State of the Union addresses, and I don't remember which one it was, but I know it was after I voted for him, so it had to be in the 2012 to 2016 range. And he talked about regulation, and I'd never thought about it this way before. Like, before Obama, it seemed to me like deregulation was a good idea, because in my mind, it seemed like if you just let companies have free reign over what they're doing, that it would all work itself out, like consumers would figure out which were the good companies and the bad ones would get weeded out. And
it's the free hand of the market, right?
Right.
You and Adam Smith. Okay.
Right. And that was my philosophy. But when I heard, and I don't know if this is dumb that I just got persuaded by one guy talking, but the way he was talking and what he was saying specifically, it reminded me of the type of compassion that we're called to as Christians, like loving your neighbor. That's the second greatest commandment, like 1 is love God, 2 is love your neighbor, and
then there's love your enemy.
Right, exactly. That's in there somewhere too. So
I mean that's
And Obama, he was talking about how, and he wasn't crazy about regulation. He wasn't like, let's regulate all of this stuff. He was just like, sensible regulation because companies are taking advantage of people.
So let's back up a little bit from that and say that I really do believe that so many votes are cast based on myopic views of very particular things.
Yeah.
Be it guns, abortion, socialism. Like, you're so close to one particular thing that you can't really get a view in the most healthy way. So when we start talking about the NRA, let's look at things like, basically it was a hunt club until they were like, oh shit, nobody's buying guns
cut that
anymore.
out.
My bad.
That's okay.
Oh crap,
Not your bad.
nobody's buying guns anymore. What are we going to do? Let's turn it into a personal protection issue and start raising the fears of people so they want to protect themselves. Every single time a mass shooting occurs, what happens to gun sales?
They go through the roof.
They absolutely go through the roof for the following 3 or 4 days. So while everyone in the country is like, someone from a hotel room was just killing people randomly as quickly as he could. This is terrible. The people with the gunshots are like, come and get them.
Right.
We're in the money.
Right.
Like,
well, and the result of that, the result of the fear mongering is a 12-year-old girl who takes a semi-automatic. I mean, you bought that gun because you thought it was going to protect your family.
Right, and at the end of the day, it's
Yeah.
not about guns. It's not about a 12-year-old girl. It's not about the number of people that died in Las Vegas. It's not. At the end of the day, it's about how can I preserve what I've got now and keep everyone else away from it. That's what everyone is first motivated by their self-interest. And if I'm really going to operate within the convictions that I think I'm called to operate within, I need to think about not only myself, but also my neighbor and my enemy.
Yeah.
And so now let's take this out of religious talk because that sounds terrible, right? Let's go to John Nash and the game theory of economics, right?
Right.
You are going to prosper much more when you care about how the person next to you prospers and the person next to them prospers and the person next to them. And we absolutely see that over and over again demonstrated in economic theories and numbers that come out. It is very rare that someone can, and it might be very short-term front end, you make a ton of money in your efforts. But in the long run, if everybody works together to maximize profits, and you're not only caring about yourself, but you're caring about other people.
And you're 100% correct. And it's nice to have different arguments to back this up. But I feel like the religious one is pretty pertinent considering the majority of conservatives are staunchly conservative because of their religious beliefs. I mean, isn't that true? I'm guessing at that.
Well, I think there are several strands of conservatism.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I totally agree.
You can be a religious conservative. You can be kind of a social and cultural conservative. And you can also be kind of a pro-business conservative.
Okay.
And then you could be all three or two of three or a little bit of in between. And then there is sort of tangentially related, but not necessarily conservative, is somebody who is libertarian.
I was going to go there.
Which is, I look at it as half conservative.
Yes.
So you could, in theory, be economically or fiscally, say, libertarian.
Yeah, did you guys read about that? Did you read about the town in Texas that went libertarian?
The whole town. No. I think I did hear about that. Dude. I think I heard about
amazing.
That. There's just
somebody they're walking around, they're like, why aren't there any lights in the street? It's really dark.
Well, I'm glad.
Nobody's paying for them. Well, what are you going to do now? Like, that was the example. Like, no one is caring for anything.
Well, and it's,
because everyone just sort of thought it would.
I thought it would work itself out. Well, and not every libertarian would go to that extreme. And I mean, we work with some libertarians, and I have a lot of like Christian friends who are libertarian. And I'm glad we hit on this topic because that's the argument that I had to struggle with when I kind of made my shift from staunch conservatives. I mean, who knows what party they are when they're 17? I mean, you think you know. But like when I was developing my own sense of politics, like I had to grapple with the libertarianism was a kind of a new thing when I was making these types of decisions.
Yeah, did you take the test where it's a circle and it puts the dots somewhere?
No, I didn't, but I know what you're talking about. But lately, I've been challenging my friends who are libertarian. We work with one of them, and I know you know who I'm talking about. Who, you know, they'll want to hold on to their theology and also hold on to the idea that we don't need government for really anything. You know, I mean, they might say one or two things is what the government is good for. Like maybe public safety and that's it. We're shutting it down right after that, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the idea that I've heard. And then I want to challenge them, especially if they're Christians, to try to ask, like, why have we gone to the extreme of saying that government is good for nothing in our efforts to be kind to, and compassionate to our neighbors? Like, why can't government be a tool? Because my idea used to be, government's fully corrupt, you can't trust it for anything. What if, crazy idea, we got involved with government to the point that now we're sending people up through the ranks of government that do care about the things that we care about. You know, government is not some like alien entity. It's us.
And look,
like we make up the government.
Everybody wants a little teeny tiny government until they have a grievance.
Yeah,
then
exactly.
they need something decided.
Exactly.
And they're like, well...
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Wait, we do need regulation in regard to this.
Sure.
Whatever that issue is.
Right. We need regulation. We need prison reform. We need, justice system reform. I mean, there are a lot of issues that are personal to me that I think... It has to be the government. We can't fix this without the government,
One of the things that people sort of don't talk too much about, but is, I think, a strong reality, and that is the government sort of influences the larger actions of the people. And so there was a move when I was younger for this notion of compassionate conservatism. And it is not the job of the government to care for the poor, it's the job of the church. And people will give to charities who are going to do that if you give them the money to do that. So we're not going to tax you as much, we're going to pull taxes back, government's going to shrink, and people will take care of the poor. And what we see over and over again, demonstrably over and over again, is that people take their cues in terms of investment off of what the government does.
Wow.
And that's true economically all the way up the chain, right? So if the government starts reining in their spending, people start reining in their spending. And what happens when the people in a capitalist market, what happens when people don't spend money?
Pew. Yeah.
More people don't spend money.
Right.
Because they don't have it. And then more people, like it goes all the way up the chain, and our first cue is always government spending.
See, I didn't even think about it that way, but I absolutely identify with that movement you're talking about, and the argument that was made from so many of my friends and family that government shouldn't be the ones stepping in to take care of people, the church should be. And for a while I was like, yeah, that sounds right, church should do that. I don't understand why it can't be both. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, the reality is...
Why can't it be both?
It is both.
It's both. It has to be both.
I mean, it clearly is both.
The church doesn't get to make sweeping legislation about things.
So I have a family member who works at the Greenville Rescue Mission as a counselor, and that is largely funded by private donation.
Yeah.
And it's a Christian organization, so it's mostly Christians. Not all. They get some money from United Way and other places, I think. Sort of making that up. But I know there's a lot of investment in what they do because they have success in caring for the homeless population.
Sure.
So both has always sort of coexisted.
Yeah.
And so the notion that suddenly there should be no welfare, that people are abusing the system. The other thing is, I think it's really important to sort of step back. One of my best friends, Ben, recently graduated from Clemson in city planning. And he was like, dude, when you start looking at the numbers in terms of what happens when people go on welfare and when welfare is managed well, does it reduce poverty and take people from dependence upon welfare into stable contributing members of society?
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, we see evidence that it does have a net positive effect.
Wow.
Because you always hear the stories of, she has 18 children and she doesn't, and she never does anything.
We're to the point where they're posting pictures on Facebook and Instagram of people's grocery carts saying, you're using food stamps and yet you're buying X product. You know, like you bought Monster energy drinks with
I'll tell you
exactly. And they're judging people for
That's
this.
exactly right.
Like,
so let me tell you why they're judging people. Because they have absolutely no concept of poverty and the various types of poverty.
Yeah.
So it isn't just that someone doesn't have money, it's that not having money, which is our means of doing, also can make you poor in a lot of other ways, including the ability to buy really healthy food.
Right.
The other thing is, and this is sort of interesting, the cheap food is the biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah.
You get more
Cheetos.
energy from the calories of cheap food than you do expensive food.
Yeah.
The fewer the calories, the more expensive the product.
Yeah.
So they're actually making a wise decision in buying that horrible
I haven't
stuff
heard this.
because it's going to give their cells the energy they need.
Wow.
And I mean, it's bad for them.
So,
we get it. But it's also...
FYI, shut up about people with food
It's
stamps,
also none of your
social
business
media.
how
Exactly.
they- how they do it.
You're taking pictures of somebody's food cart.
And this is, for a long time, has been a racialized stereotype,
Oh, yeah.
right? The welfare queen is always black,
Yes.
and it's always a black woman, and she always has kids, an extreme number of kids, not 2, right? You got
Right.
like 19.
17. Yes.
And she manages to get rich off of all of this.
Oh yeah, it's
Right.
a scam. She's just totally stealing
Right.
money out of our pockets.
None of this is true.
No.
And this, to me, is coded racism,
Yeah,
essentially,
yes.
right? After the civil rights movement, you could no longer say that black people are a drain on the government, but if you wanted to imply it, instead you would just use the image of the bullshit.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And I don't think that every person who goes out and votes in like staunch, straight line, single ticket poll is in the booth conscientiously thinking, or in the booth because they're racist, or because they're greedy, or because they care more about themselves than they do their neighbor. I'm telling you that my shift happened because I zoomed out and looked at the broader picture.
Exactly.
And the broader picture tells a better story. So the illustration that I give this to kids all the time when I'm in the classroom. We're looking at things that are very specific here. Mm-hmm. And you will never get the whole story until you zoom out.
Yeah.
If I'm going to imagine having, and this is sort of what I felt like I was, not intentionally, certainly not by my family intentionally, but when I say I was sold a false bill of goods, that's the one. This is what I mean. Someone was having me look through a ring. Are you like jewelers use a jeweler's ring, which is like,
jewelers
you can look at the
Yeah.
gemstone through this. They were having me look through that ring at a very specific point on a much larger picture.
Yeah.
So I tell kids, everybody's seen the Mona Lisa. Now imagine that I tell you to look through this thing at this and tell you this is the Mona Lisa, and your understanding up into that moment when you step away is that the whole of the Mona Lisa is this little tiny black area because I focused in on one tiny thing.
Right.
And when you step back, you get a much more robust and frankly, I mean, you get the true reality and image when you step away from it. And in the same way, politically, when you zoom out, you can see how the decisions that are being promoted with either party are going to affect other people.
Sure.
Like, and if you don't consider that, you're not doing your civic duty, I should say.
Sure.
And just to defend conservatives for a second, because again, this is my parents, and I love them, and they're rational people for the most part, you know, and they'll go vote Republican every time. I feel like, and it may be a generational thing, I don't know. Probably not. It's maybe a regional generational thing. But I almost want to say, in their minds, you're right, they don't, it's not about all of these divisive issues like race and personal freedoms. In their minds, and especially for my dad, I feel like they still feel like it's their spiritual duty to fight for a government that reflects their Christian beliefs, because they feel like that would benefit the entire nation. So it's and for them, if there were a theocracy here, that would be ideal, right? And they have not considered
that a theocracy could be run by any religion.
Right.
And they could be the enemy.
Right. But, but they would defend the supremacy of Christianity, and that's fine.
Sure.
That's
but
a side note.
If the governing theocracy was something else.
Right. But they also have kind of a warped view of what the benefits of a theocracy would be.
But
right?
they don't know They don't know that.
Right.
How can they know that?
Right. Exactly. They don't know. And I want to kind of
And
ask
not
Michael,
because of a lack of intelligence.
Right.
Right?
No,
So
they're very
like,
smart. My dad's a genius. He's like an astronomer on the side. I want to like veer off and talk to Michael, because you've just been asking questions, and John and I have shared a lot of personal information.
Yes.
Give us your background, because you kind of have a different story than John and I.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, yes, as we talked about before, I didn't grow up in the South, and nor did I grow up Christian, so I
Right.
come from a completely different place.
Yeah.
My parents are what we would call yellow dog Democrats. They would vote for a yellow dog as long as it ran on the Democratic Party.
All of my grandparents were that. Like, my parents were the
Whoa.
it's the South.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Lincoln was a Republican.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the South, you were a Democrat
Okay.
if you were a Christian.
Right, yeah. And they have sort of switched since. Yes. So my father read the Washington Post for a long time. He still does every day. And then touted around like it was the Holy Bible.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, I was like, cool, the Democratic Party is the way to go. For a long time, my father would blaspheme in front of the Republicans. So
Yeah.
they were the GD Republicans. It took me a long time to figure out, like, oh, that's not actually the name of the party. Oh.
I love it.
GDR instead of GOP.
Yeah. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's just the Republicans. He just adds a little spice to it.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
happy with them. I got it.
Right.
Yes. So that for a long time, I thought like this is the way we go, and I voted for John Kerry whatever year that was. But on the way out, was it 2004? I would have voted for John Kerry. I kind of felt like I wanted to vomit,
Yeah.
but I couldn't articulate why I wanted to vomit, except for I thought that John Kerry kind of sucked.
Yeah. His
And-
hair alone. I'm sorry, that was really judgmental. Go
It
ahead.
was, and
Yeah.
his hair is far better than mine, so I'll give him that.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I disagree.
So I was like, yeah, what is going on here?
Yeah.
Like, something tells me this is wrong, and I'm not comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't exactly know what is wrong, and I don't know why I feel uncomfortable, except for I feel like this guy is not very good. I voted for Barack Obama twice, and then in the process, I also finished graduate school. And what graduate school did was it pushed me further to the left
Yeah.
than my parents.
Yeah.
So because I have a long time to study history, I realized that the Democrats haven't really, and this is the modern Democratic Party, not the Democratic Party of the Strom Thurmond in the South, haven't really done much for the issues that I care about, primarily which we would call civil rights issues, right? And I sort of agree with John that I feel very much beholden to the bigger picture, right? Civil rights issues are not the ones that are typically popular for middle-class white people like myself.
Right.
But I understand that I have a larger duty because I spent 5 years studying the results of when minority groups are excluded, that it has really horrible consequences.
Yeah.
Really, really horrible. And so I moved further to the left.
Yeah.
When I moved back to Greenville, which was in July of 2016, I realized that I had sort of out-lefted the Democratic Party. And I was like, I'll just register as independent. I remained tired, and I had grown tired at that point, of them running people, with the exception of Barack Obama, who I considered essentially the same.
Yeah.
So I've had the displeasure of voting for Al Gore,
Yeah.
who I consider very similar to John Kerry, who I consider very similar to Hillary Clinton. None of them were good candidates, and none of them reflected what I believed. So I felt like it was time for me to break with them, to show them, and not that anybody in the Democratic Party cares about me or knows I exist, but for my own being, that I needed them to do a little better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To bring candidates who were not...
Well, so that's super interesting for a number of reasons.
Yes.
Number one, Obama ran as a moderate.
Right.
He wasn't out there fighting for gay marriage. He wasn't out there like
Not
in fact,
initially, right.
and changed through the course.
Sure.
Okay, so while we're talking about change, because I think we've all experienced a political change.
Sure.
All towards the left,
Yeah.
every single Supreme Court justice in their tenure moves from whatever position they go to the left over their tenure.
Why do you think that is?
Because they have to wrestle with really hard issues.
things.
And so many people are going into the voting booth who, frankly, don't really wrestle that much. Or if they do, it's a super little, it's only their issue that they wrestle with and not the issue of the people next to them.
Yeah.
Or anywhere near them.
Yeah.
Sure. And I'm not sure I agree with you that all of them have moved to the left, but like Earl Warren, for example, who is, of the famous...
Will you give me
Warren.
95%?
No, I give you 42%.
I'm not talking about all current.
42.
I'm talking over the course of time, they move left. Even Scalia. Are you kidding me?
I don't know enough about this.
I don't think...
But I will say that I love, Michael, that you kind
Even
of...
if it's a little bit, it's a move.
We'll have to dig into this because I don't know, and I don't
totally
trust
read that
either of
somewhere.
you. To give
I don't
me
read
an
all the
accurate
opinions.
perspective.
There's
I don't
80
believe you.
pages long. Like,
I'm just kidding. But I wanted to say, after what you said, Michael, that I think you've articulated the problem that the Democratic Party is facing right now, which is that they have yet to kind of all come together on this is what we stand for, and we've got to find a really strong candidate to represent this stuff. You know what I mean?
And I would like to discuss publicly, because nobody, no Main Street outlet has ever said this frankly, or I'd like to have it out there in the stratosphere.
Sure.
Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate.
Oh my God, Michael.
no, we all
Yes. No, not everybody admitted that at the time. I think it's...
She did a horrible job.
There's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on here.
Right. I want to be explicit to say I voted for Hillary Clinton.
I did not, but I didn't vote for anybody.
I did not have any problem voting, but I wasn't excited. She didn't energize at all. So I want to say I agree with you, but I don't think she's a bad person.
No, but that's the thing. You gotta, when you're talking about the American voting public, okay, you've got to have a candidate. And, we three in the room may realize that Hillary would have been a way better president than Donald Trump, regardless of her personal failings, right? Like, she would have presidented really well because her history was one of, like, I get politics, I get how this works, I can play the game. Like, it probably would have gone more smoothly. But, like, that doesn't matter as much to the voting public as it should. When it comes to election day, right, you got to have a candidate. If you're going to win the Democratic vote, you got to have a candidate like Barack Obama who has a personality, who is young and energetic, who is not clouded in stupid but notable scandals. Do you know what I mean? She wasn't a good candidate. I agree with him 100%. But I wanted there to be a really good, strong Democratic candidate.
And I saw...
Well, when you say she wasn't a good candidate,
Yes.
around what things do you say that?
So, two things. In 2008, when I was in graduate school for the first time, I saw Hillary Clinton. She actually came to Millersville University where I was in graduate school. And I was in graduate school for 150 years. Covered all this time.
I'm older than everybody.
That's right. Yes, I saw her, and she had a rally at the school. And if you can't get a bunch of your supporters excited at a college, which is a notoriously liberal place, then you're not doing something right. You're lacking the widespread appeal that Sarah was talking about.
Je ne sais quoi.
Right. So this is the first thing I realized that she wasn't a good candidate. The second thing that really made me realize that she wasn't a good candidate is because I understood, and I continue to understand, that the Clintons are very much moderates, essentially, and her husband followed a philosophy of triangulation, which was to gauge where the left was, to gauge where the right was, and then try and strike a compromise. Well, to me, this is not what I'm voting for. I don't want a moderate candidate. I want somebody who meets me on the left, right? And what she did, I felt, was to try and... When she realized Bernie Sanders was, gaining some support, and probably much more than she expected, she sort of moved to take some of his policies and pick off some of his supporters. But I never felt that was really her governing philosophy. And so now we don't have I don't have charisma, and I don't have the sort of policies that I'm confident in. What do I have to vote for?
Yeah, so what do you think, more broadly speaking, in terms of the Democratic Party then?
Yeah.
That the desire that you had for somebody more left?
Yes.
At this point, if we're reading the political climate of the country writ large, your candidate's never going to win.
No.
They're too left.
Yes. Correct.
So, hence that triangulation seems to make sense. Then at least you get something that you're after over the the crazy person we have in office now. Does that make sense? Like,
a little bit of something is better than a bunch of nothing, is essentially what you're saying. You could very much. I mean, that's a perfectly rational way to look at things, in my opinion. That is not the way I look at things. But if that's the way you view.
So that's what I mean. The thing that I'm looking at is really the long game, though.
Right.
Not the short game.
Sure.
It's not November. It's sort of over the long haul. What's this going to look like?
Sure.
Well, and so to your point, what's really interesting is all the fear mongering that I was totally buying into. If you do this, I mean, this was my thinking, and I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's true. Yeah, these pro-choice people, and this is not what I heard at home. This was the undercurrent of what was happening.
Yeah.
These pro-choice people, if we continue down this road, euthanasia is going to be common. They're going to start killing all the old people, do away with. I mean, and it was crazy talk, propaganda, BS.
Yeah.
So when they were threatening all those things, and Bill and Hillary hold two tenures as president, terms as president. And all of the things that we were warned would happen to the world coming to a grievous and fiery end didn't occur.
Didn't happen.
The things that happened when the left wasn't as scary as we thought they needed to be, they had to move further left to sort of distinguish themselves from the right.
Yes.
Interesting.
Hillary Clinton, I appreciate what you're talking about when you said that she wasn't energizing. She was in the spotlight, under a microscope, whatever metaphor you want to use, all of her life. I totally get the private server. I get it.
Yeah.
I get why she needed something that wasn't going to be under scrutiny all the time. I get it.
And in Hillary Clinton's defense, she won the popular vote.
She absolutely did.
So, there is that.
That's absolutely true.
That's true. I feel like there were so many people that got on with Bernie, though, that got angry that he didn't end up being the nominee. I mean, I'm trying to think back. The feedback I got was mostly Facebook scrolling through, but my liberal friends were divided almost 50-50 among Hillary and Bernie, and I feel like that was part of the problem.
Well, so one of the things that you said,
sure,
and I don't know how you guys wrap these things up. I mean, I feel like we could talk for hours, but
we could.
One of the things that you said that I thought was really interesting was that the thing that motivates you to move further to the left is civil rights.
Yes.
And I'm telling you that my faith convicts me to put that at the front of how I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like that equality, if everyone has the image of God impressed upon them, then we should be thinking about how to protect the rights of everyone. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about welfare that when there's sort of this trope that welfare equals African American black woman who's just having babies indiscriminately in order to collect a check. We know that's a false trope.
Sure.
From the get-go.
Uh-huh.
But if we are going to live by our convictions, it's not just that she's a woman who's doing this. One of the things that we haven't talked about is all of the systems that are in place that are keeping her in that position.
Right. Sure. We're talking about generational poverty, and this is something that was never explained to me.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about laws that that are coming
systematic
down.
injustice.
Right. It is institutionalized suppression of rights.
Sure.
That are
But I think it's a combination of the two.
The vast majority of people who went into the voting booth weren't thinking about her. They were thinking about themselves and not wanting that to happen to them. Yeah. So how do they need to vote in order to prevent it from happening to them?
Which is already a false way to be thinking about it, because it's very unlikely that you as a middle-class white are going to be dramatically affected by who's the president. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I mean, so one of my best friends I grew up with from Travelers Rest of all places.
Yeah. T.R.
Went to a Devil Dog.
Tried
and true. Is a Martin Luther King Jr. scholar.
Okay.
Got his PhD at UVA. And he's one of the many people who have helped me sort of understand things like, oh, wait. It hadn't occurred to me because I don't see it day to day.
Right.
And when you zoom out, when you try and develop an eye that becomes lucid to the well-being of other people, especially whole categories of people, like the African American race or the Hispanic race, people from Mexico,
or people who are not in the same social economic, bracket as you. Yeah, and I think if we're gonna wrap it up, this is a good place to wrap it up, because for me, it didn't even take somebody coming and grabbing me by the collar face to face and saying, hey, this is what's going on for me in my reality. I started listening to a different type of radio program, Like, it is really about getting out of your bubble. Get out of your echo chamber.
Well, and I want to be cognizant going forward, and I don't want to be in another echo chamber. I don't want to jump from one to another.
Right.
One.
No, that's a really good point. But what are your sources of information? That's the question. And you should be talking to real people face to face. Absolutely, you should. And you should be.
Yeah, when I read through my Facebook or Twitter feed, if I see too much, then too much of the same thing, I'm like, I need to broaden my scope.
Absolutely.
And subscribe to something that's not what's in here now. That's different.
Yeah. Okay, if you had to leave our listeners with a closing thought, and maybe let's pretend that we've got listeners who have been with the same political party all their lives and they've never considered the other perspective, what would your suggestion be?
Zoom out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest thing.
What does that look like practically, zooming out?
Try and imagine yourself in someone's position who isn't the same as yours. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Consider why they vote, whatever, the opposite of where you are.
Yeah.
Why do they do that? That's going to help us avoid future catastrophes like the one we're currently sort of embroiled in. I think if I thought about the people who might go and support the candidate that has now become the leader of the free world, ish. I think if people could imagine themselves, if I could have said, what would make me want to vote for that person?
Yeah.
Then I could empathize with what and maybe bring something to the conversation that would introduce a candidate on the other side that we both could.
Sure.
That we all could get behind. Yeah, absolutely.
You wouldn't have been behind them because you're going to be all the way
to
the triangulated.
Right. Well, I'll always consider. How's that?
That's fair.
There you go.
Me too.
And I think that's the good wrap up. Is just consider, stop, take a breath, take a beat. Yeah,
I registered independent too.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean I'm never going to vote for a Republican again. Again.
Right.
And I would hold somebody up like Bob Inglis, who is rational, and he's out there saying, we really need to pay attention to the environment.
Yeah.
It's not
a hoax. Global warming isn't a hoax.
It ended up losing him his seat.
Well, this is a lot, and I almost want to have a part 2 of this discussion because it's so pertinent to what's happening in our country, and I think it's so relevant for people who are questioning, like we are, what we were always taught about the way the world works versus what we see actually happening. And we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts and your story about this.
Thanks, I love it. Forgot about the mic.
Yes, thank you so much for being here, John. And this ends another great episode. In the meantime, please check out our Twitter, which is at @Splain_yourself for updates and other content. And as always, drop it like it's hot and be ready to splain yourself.
Woo! All right.